Our keynote speaker tonight, Mr. William Jasper. He's an author, a journalist, investigative reporter, a husband, a father, a grandfather, a documentary producer, international correspondent. For over 30 years, he has been an officially accredited correspondent to the United Nations in New York City and at UN conferences and summits around the world. He is senior editor of the New American magazine, where he has written hundreds of articles exposing UN corruption and subversion, and the decades-long plan to turn the UN into a full-fledged world government. Bill has been working with me in Kootenai County on several projects over the years, and he's a good friend, and he's a very smart guy who I go to for advice on a number of occasions. So would you all please give a warm welcome to Bill Jasper.
Thank you, Brent. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and particularly for all you good people here in Bonner County for allowing not one, but two Kootenaifornians to come up here to your territory. In fact, I've seen a few others out here in the audience, and we look toward you as a model because we are determined in Kootenai County that we are not going to go the purpleized, blue-eyed way of California. Now, don't get me wrong, I know there are probably a few refugees from that south of the border state here. In fact, I was in Planet, California for a number of years. I'm a native son here from Idaho, but like many others, I left and went to other places. I was in Southern California, fighting the good fight there for many years in Los Angeles County. Kootenai County's better, let me tell you. And in Sacramento County, Kootenai County's better, let me tell you. But when I went down there, after graduating from the University of Idaho in Moscow, which at that time was compared to another Moscow, that was in 1970. So when I went down to Planet, California in 1976, I began working with a number of people, including the Los Angeles Police Department Intelligence Division, not as an officer, but I was working as an undercover reporter amongst terrorist organizations and communist groups like such as the Communist Party USA, Revolutionary Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, and many other groups that were connected to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Sandinistas, and other groups in the area. And I was working with a foundation known as the Western Goals Foundation that was set up by Congressman Larry McDonald from Georgia, and a number of other congressmen, including Phil Crane, and a number of very high-profile patriots, such as former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Thomas Moorer, and General Patton III, the son of the World War II general. And we recognized that, hey, there's a real problem in this country. Somebody has to keep track of who all the subversives are and terrorist groups operating around the country. So I was involved in that for a number of years. Congressman Larry McDonald was my good friend. He was shot down by a Soviet MiG on Korean Airlines 007. You may recall that, back in 1984. So we are engaged in, and I've been very acutely aware of this for many decades now, in a real war here in the United States. and here in Idaho. Now, my talk here tonight is keeping Idaho red. That's what I was asked to talk about. And as a die-hard anti-communist, that was a little difficult to swallow. And besides, that whole red-blue Republican Democrat paradigm, I'm a little suspicious of, since it was really foisted on us pretty recently by NBC, and then the other networks joined in on that. But nevertheless, we know what we're talking about when we say keep Idaho red. We mean what? Well, we mean on the surface, keeping Idaho Republican. But is that really all that it is? What about those folks who are Republican in name only? Do we want that kind of red Republican? No, that's actually those folks in the Republican Party who are Republican in name only are really purpleizers. They have joined with all the Democrats, the liberal left, the globalists, the fake news media to purpleize and then flip to blue all of the red states. And let me tell you, Idaho is a target. We're in the crosshairs. We are known as a pocket of resistance. They don't like that. So there are a number of ways of purpleizing a state. And I'm going to go into a little bit of that because we are confronting it every day, and much of the time we don't even realize it. So when I came back here to Idaho after a long sojourn in California and in New York, I was a correspondent in New York at the United Nations. I was accredited there. They hated me. They didn't want to give me accreditation there. They tried to take away my accreditation a number of times. But somebody had to be there to say and to tell the truth about what was really happening at the UN. I was the only conservative reporter in 1992 at the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. That was the summit at which the global warming, the ozone depletion, the rainforest initiatives, and all of these things came out of, all of the enviro-Leninist agenda. And of course, the great hero of that summit was communist dictator of Cuba, Fidel Castro. Now, this was I've had many moments at the United Nations in New York and at summits around the world, which demonstrated the truly subversive nature of the United Nations. However, that was one of the most chilling, because when Fidel Castro came into that summit, it erupted. All of the delegates, the diplomats, the UN ambassadors, "Viva Fidel! Viva Fidel!" It went on and on and on for minute after minute after minute. And I looked around me. What was most disturbing was that in the press corps where I was, all of these journalists, so-called, and correspondents were all doing the same thing. So you get kind of an idea from that. Where I grew up, that was called a clue, that something was wrong there. These are folks that hate the United States. We give them billions of dollars for now 70 years, and what has it bought us? The Socialist International runs the United Nations. The Socialist International is the largest Marxist body in the world, including Marxist and former communist parties from around the world. They run it. So you look at the delegation, we write about it all the time in the New American Magazine. We're about the only publication that has gone in depth and exposed that part of the United Nations. Of course, we're really big on exposing everything about the United Nations. But every day in your schools, in your communities, there are United Nations programs being insinuated into the schools into your local regional planning, local development on sustainable development. All these things come out of the United Nations, and much of that came out of that one conference in Rio de Janeiro, the Earth Summit. Now, when we look at the situation here, people told me or asked me when they heard that I was moving from California up to Idaho. They asked me to say, well, what are you doing? Are you running away? Are you heading for the hills? And I said, no, I'm going to pick my battlefield. I'm going to still stay in the fight. I write mostly and focus mostly on national and international issues. So I can do that, fortunately, thanks to technology, from my little ranch in Idaho, up here east of Coeur d'Alene. And so I do that. I have sworn off traveling, even before the coronavirus. That isn't what concerns me most. It isn't the coronavirus that should really be of major concern to Americans. It should be the TDS virus. Now, what's the TDS virus? The Trump derangement syndrome virus. The TDS virus has been going on now for over 4 years, and it's been increasing in virulence and in its casualty count every single day. The folks that are promoting it have not let up a bit. They will not relent on their attacks, and they have permeated and infected the whole body politic. So they want to, in their purpleizing agenda, they want to completely transform the United States. And when they say transform, they mean destroy it as we know it, as a constitutional republic, free enterprise, as a Christian nation. So why is the Trump derangement syndrome so virulent? Well, they recognize that for the first time in our lives, many of you here may not be as ancient as I, but for 50 years I've been fighting these battles, and I've never seen any time in my life where we had any president in the White House who has taken on the globalist purple, red, pink agenda across the board like our President Donald Trump. That is why they hate him. Why? Because he is, first of all, this is what has caused the biggest response to him. You all recall when he called out the fake news media and named them. He said the fake New York Times, the Washington Post, NBC, CNN. He named them and shamed them, and they cannot take that. He didn't just do it once. No other politician, no other political figure has ever done that and consistently gone after them. And then they confirmed his accusations by relentlessly attacking him on everything, and not just him. I mean, do you remember Nicholas Sandmann and the boys that were at the March for Life? You remember Jussie Smollett when they turned that into a complete catastrophe? They've stepped on their own tongues over and over again. It's exposed the fake news media, which has been so crucially important on promoting all of the socialist and left-wing agenda, which has been afflicting America for the last 50 years. So the fake news media was one of his fake news media meme has been one of the most welcome and most important contributions that he's made. So I say thank you, thank you, thank you for that alone, President Trump. But he went beyond that. He made a major, major issue about globalism versus nationalism. Now that's something that we in the New American Magazine and the John Birch Society have been pointing out for 50, 60 years. Look, we have globalists in our government who really want to subject America's national sovereignty, really eradicate America's national sovereignty, make us subjected to international law, to global law, which they call law, but it's really lawlessness because they can change it at will. They want to tie us down and strip away our resources and our rights. He took that on. He is taking that on. That is why he is hated so much. Defending our borders. Oh, that's a big one. Now, what do they call him? Racist, xenophobe, because he stands up for our borders. And you know, when you stick up for your borders, you're called anti-immigrant. Look, I've got a lot of immigrants in my family. My wife's family is from Spain. I have lots of friends from all over the world who are immigrants here. They're immigrants. They came in legally. They came here and abided by our laws. They immigrated here properly. Every country in the world has immigration laws. What he has been pointing out is what we have been saying for decades. Migration is not immigration. You do not have a right to migrate into our country, just like I don't have a right to migrate into your home, into your yard. Somebody migrates onto my ranch, I go out and see what they're doing there. And if they don't belong there, they get escorted off. And that's what we call freedom and property rights here in the United States. And we have, as a nation, property rights and should have control over our borders. In fact, we must demand control over our borders. He is the first president who has seriously gone after this. I did a video documentary on this 31 years ago. I was the only reporter to go all along our southern border at that time. I went along with the Border Patrol. I went along over a course of 2 years. All of the various points where they came across, I interviewed coyotes and immigrants, or rather migrants, illegal aliens. President Reagan promised he was going to do something about it, but then he signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which was the first huge amnesty. So we have had no president up until now who has been serious about protecting our borders. China. We've been harping on that for many years. These are just two of our recent issues. This one is China making our medicine. This came out long before the coronavirus attack. We pointed out, look, if we get in a real desperate situation, we're dependent on China for all of our medicines, for antibiotics. This one is China's new aggression all around the world, not just in the South China Sea, but all around the world. We've been hammering on that for years. President Trump is the first one to do something about that. In fact, back in 2009, I was prohibited from entering the National Governors Association China Summit in Salt Lake City because I had written a cover story criticizing the National Governors Association for welcoming the so-called governors of China, who were all Communist Party functionaries, and who were bringing all the Chinese business entrepreneurs, who are all Chinese Communist Party flunkies for the state, over to the Governor's Conference. I wrote an article, not an abusive article, exposing the National Governors Association cozying up to China. I was the only journalist not allowed in. They brought in over 100 so-called journalists from China, which I pointed out at the time. They had all been ordered to go to the National Propaganda School in China just before they came over here. So Chinese state communist propagandists were welcomed by our governors, and I won't mention a certain governor of the potato state whose last name started with Otter, who was a big proponent of that. And in fact, I appealed to him to help me get into the conference and was informed that he was one of the reasons why I didn't get in there. So when we talk about the purpleizing influences, the Republican Party has been hugely influenced by Communist China for the last 40 years. And we can thank Henry Kissinger and many of the big Republican lights who have facilitated this and promoted this and who have led this effort. And so when we talk about the war that we are in, and we are in a war, ladies and gentlemen, you recognize that. I'm sure that's why you're here tonight. We have to help our fellow citizens who, we all have our daily lives to live. We've got to make a living. We've got to do all these things. So it's hard to keep track of all this stuff that's going on. But we have to not only inform ourselves, we have to go out there to our friends and neighbors. Secretary McKeon just mentioned that we need to register voters. How many of you gone to your church in the last 2 weeks? I had talked to our pastor and I had registration. I got some registration forms from Brent, and so far I've registered 30 new people that have moved in here to the area as Republicans. And they were happy to do that. They said, oh, I've been wondering, how do I go about registering? And so you'll find that in your service clubs, in your churches. Ask about that and set up a table there after your service and get those folks signed up. But again, just signing people up as Republicans isn't the total answer, of course. We need real constitutionalist, hard red rock Republicans who are going to do what? Stand for principles that the Republican Party is supposed to stand for. Not all the stuff that the Me Too liberalism that they've been doing for the last several decades. So, again, let's get back to the purpleizing influence that is trying to turn this state and every state from red to blue. And of course, in order to do that, they even refer to that as purpleizing or creating a purple state. And I'll tell you some of the ones, of course, some of are obvious. We have big media. I won't spend a lot of time on that because I think all of you know who the big media are, the MSM, the fake news media. We've already named them, but Professor Grosclose, several years ago, who did a big study on this, pointed out that in any given election, the media, the bias of the major media, will cause 9 to 10 points difference in an election, because the media traditionally, all the studies show, overwhelmingly favor the Democrats, and not just Democrats, but the liberal Democrats. And if it's a Republican race, they will favor the liberal Republican race, the liberal Republican candidate. So that's 9 to 10%. And that, according to other studies, is an underestimate. Now, that is bad enough. We've seen in the last several years where it's come full to the fore. That's one of the things that, again, we have to thank President Trump, because he's flushed it out into the open. They're now so emphatically anti-Trump and anti-American and anti-Republican that there should be no doubt with anyone. But big media's influence on elections may pale next to big tech. Big tech, we got Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Yahoo, all the rest of the big tech companies. Overwhelmingly, study after study shows, and now we don't have to rely on the studies. We have insiders from Google and YouTube and other companies who have come out and have revealed that, yes, we load our algorithms, we tilt it in favor of the search engines, Facebook, Twitter, we do it in favor of the liberal Democrats. So Dr. Robert Epstein, who's done one of the most extensive studies of this, makes a very frightening And I hope he's wrong. I think he's overstating it, just as Professor Grosclose may have understated it. Professor Epstein says this, and he's a liberal Democrat. He voted for Hillary. He says he's not for Trump. He's against most of what Trump is for, but he's an honest man. He says, this is not good. Big tech, that GoogFit, Twice YouTube, etc. He said, they are going to steal this next election. He said, they are going to account for as much as 15 million votes. And he said the devastating part of it is you won't even know it because they're affecting you every day. You plug in a search term, you want to know about Biden or you want to know about Trump. It's going to, everything that you put in for Trump is going to be negative. Everything for Biden or Bernie or any other on a state or local, it's going to be completely biased. And so you won't even know, you'll just say, oh, okay, you go through the top 100 stories. None of us could do that. I do sometimes, but most people don't. Go through the top 7 or 8 stories. They're all going to be anti-Trump and pro whoever is a Democrat. And not just there, but downstream in all of the other races as well. So 15 million votes, if he is correct. Ladies and gentlemen, has there been any race at the national level for the presidency over the last 8 races, 32 years, where that would make a difference? Every single one of them. There hasn't been one that has been over, I think, 9.1 or 9.2 million difference. So if he's right, 15 million votes. So he says there's no way that Trump can win in 2020. I beg to differ with him. I don't think he's right in that regard, but it points out the devastating potential that they have, and it shows really how dangerous they are and why we need some of the corrective legislation which has given big tech all of these special advantages where they don't have to be treated as publishers, yet they get all the advantages of being so. So I want to switch to another one of the purpleizers. There's, of course, big labor, big business, big green, the environmentalist lobby, big academia, and big LGBTQ. Those are, I think, the major groups there. And we don't have time to look at all of those, but we need to look at a few specifics because they can demonstrate how exactly these folks are flipping states, and not just states, but at the local level, district attorney races, governorships, state legislative races. This is where they're really focusing a lot of attention on the state legislatures. So you have national groups with huge amounts of money focusing on little districts in various places where you never have a huge outside influence in. All of a sudden in the last decade, and particularly in the last few years, we've seen lots of outside money coming into little races. Why is this? They've analyzed every state legislature and in even all the counties, and they know the vulnerable race, and they go, look, if we knock off this county commissioner here, if we knock off this state representative here, this state senator here, he's the most vocal on this issue, on guns, on abortion, on homosexual marriage, particularly homosexual marriage, and any of the LGBTQ special agenda. They've really come down and they say, we need to cut these people off early so that they cannot raise up into the state legislatures and then up into the US Congress. So we have many cases all across the country where these groups have targeted individuals, and they boast in many of their articles, they'll never know what hit them. And of course, that's what they've done. I just have time to focus on one of those, and that's big LGBTQ. How many in here have heard of Tim Gill? How many in here have heard of George Soros? Okay, everybody's heard of George Soros. Tim Gill is the unknown George Soros. He is the guy who, have you ever heard of the Colorado model? Okay, so Colorado was flipped from red to blue. How? Tim Gill did it. This was 8 years ago. How did he do it? He was a big software developer. He has put nearly $500 million into races all over the country. He first focused on Colorado. And they have a very sophisticated plan, not just money for candidates. They have media, academia, dirty tricks campaigns and whatnot. And they have been flipping places all over the country. They did not originate these ideas, but they have perfected them. They are really using what the Democratic Party, Big Labor, and Big Green have been using for decades. Yet they brought in a new element and particularly mobilized a lot of the wealthy homosexual, lesbian, transgendered folks to jump into these races. So Tim Gill has been financing these all across the country. Don't have time to get into what he's doing here in Idaho, but I'll jump to one other, big academia. We already know that most of the colleges and universities are enemy-occupied territory and have been for much of the last generation. I mean, that's just the facts. Most colleges and universities are Stalinist in their outlook. Even many of the private colleges. In fact, some of the private colleges are as bad or worse than the state colleges. But when we look at the teachers' unions in your local schools, the NEA and the AFT, American Federation of Teachers National Education Association, they have become one of the most militant and effective lobbying groups, and they have a program that they launched 2 years ago called Red for Ed. Red for Ed. They're not talking about MAGA red, and they're not talking about Republican red. I think if you look at the guy who founded them, Noah Carvelis, he spoke at the Socialist Conference in Chicago in 2018 and explained, he says, we have 2,000 organizers all over the country and working through the teachers' unions. And if you just put Red for Ed in your search engine, you'll find all across the country. They are mobilizing the teachers, and the teachers are mobilizing the students. And that's why you see this past year, millions of students turning into little Greta Thunbergs, screeching and preaching at all of the American people and at all the elected officials, telling them that we have to adopt the Paris deal for the United Nations, that the world is going to melt if we don't get rid of all fossil fuels, etc. They're propagandizing the children. So we have a huge array of forces set against us, and that can cause many people, I've found over the decades, when people start to realize this, they go, many of them, from thinking, oh, I don't see any problem, and I see that particularly with a lot of my friends that move up here from south of the border or over here from the People's Republic of Seattle. They go, here we are in freedom. Oh, sure great to be in Idaho. Yes, now you better roll up your sleeves and keep it that way, because not everybody who's coming here from where you fled are refugees for the right reasons. A lot of them are coming here and trying to turn us purple and eventually blue so that we sink into the hellholes that they've just left. And I'm not kidding, many of you know what those hellholes have become in Seattle, San Francisco, every one of the big coastal towns that have gone blue. So, no, we don't want that, we're not going to accept that. As far as I'm concerned, I said when I move up here, I'm going to be like Pelayo. Any of you ever heard of Pelayo? King Pelayo of Spain, of Asturias? Asturias is a little tiny kingdom up in the northern part of Spain. In 711 AD, the Moors, the Muslims, swept into Iberia, took over Portugal and Spain, and in less than 2 years swept the whole country. Almost then came up into France. One tiny little kingdom up in Asturias stopped them. Well, they didn't really, they fled into the mountains. I was there, I went up to Covadonga, which was the big cave up in the mountains in Spain when I was there a few years ago. And even most of the Spanish people don't know the story, but that is where the Reconquista began. At first they were ignored because inconsequential little kingdom up there, but they started infecting the rest of the Spaniards with the idea that we can take our country back. And the Moors wouldn't stand for that. So they sent army and army after them, and they beat them all back, and that began the Reconquista of Spain. The longest, as Professor Historian Warren Carroll says, the longest war in the history of the world. 770 years. That's a lot of generations. We don't want to take that long to take our country back, right? So, it could come to that though. When you lose freedom, it's very difficult to get it back. And so we want to make sure that we don't lose it. That we're gonna stay red, we're not gonna go purple. And how are we gonna do that? Well, I mentioned a couple of things. One, I mentioned big media at the start. Obviously, we don't want to get our news from big media. I'm partial, obviously, so I think if you're not getting the New American Magazine or going to us online, you should be doing it. newamerican.com. There are some copies over here. We've shown for 50 years that we're on top of all of these things and that we don't sensationalize. You can depend on what we say. But there are many other sources now. We still have them, and we have to make sure that we can continue to have platforms and that we can get out, that we don't allow big tech or their paid politicians to cut us off. And that's what they're trying to do. They recognize that, whoa, this is a big danger. People are getting outside of the box. So we have to daily support all of those news sources that are trying to get the truth out to the American people. Big academia. What do we do about that? Big ed. Red for ed, as they call them. Well, first of all, the most important thing I can say is if you have children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews, or if you don't have any of those but children in your church or your neighborhood that are going to government indoctrination centers, commonly called public schools, get them out. There's now really no excuse for continuing to do that. They are pushing every kind of perversion and subversion in the government schools. And no, we're not saying every teacher, every principal, every school official is bad, but the institutions have proven that they are irredeemable. And so, if you want to save those children, their minds, their hearts, their souls, get them out of the government school, out of the clutches of those people who would subvert them. What do? We have several issues of the magazine which go into, there's homeschooling, there's private schools, there are now online accredited schools that go from kindergarten through high school and through college. So there are plenty of alternatives. And my parents were among the first 40 some years ago. I was in college at the University of Idaho. My younger siblings, my folks were going, what are we going to do with this? They're all the kids, I have 5 brothers, 5 sisters. They go, whoa, what are we going to do about it? I said, homeschool them. They said, what's that? So I got them hooked up with Christian Liberty Academy homeschooling. And they began, this was back in the 1970s, homeschooling, when it was a subversive activity, when you could actually be arrested for doing that. And since then, it's grown into a huge, millions of students now being homeschooled. So that's just one of the alternatives there. But really, save your kids from being turned into little Greta Thunbergs or others of that sort. The LGBTQ, big LGBTQ lobby, ladies and gentlemen, this is huge. And it's coming at us in every direction, not just in the political way, which I mentioned with Tim Gill's foundation and all of his organization network, but in all of our culture, in all of the popular culture, the media, etc. Brent was there, maybe somebody else was here in Spokane when they had the drag queen story hour, you probably saw. How low can you get when actual perverts, many of them who have been arrested as sex offenders, and you can go to their websites and they are the most perverse, disgusting, atrocious activists out there, bringing them in to speak in schools and in public libraries, to read to children, to dance with them, to have the children crawl all over them. I mean, it's incredible. If you haven't heard about that, go to our website and read about it. We have to recognize that we are under attack at all different levels, and unless we are defending against those things, then we're not going to then we won't have a chance of stopping the purpleizers. Finally, the one thing that I would like to bring out that, again, I can thank President Trump especially on this because it's come all the way to the fore, and that is his battle against the deep state. Now, how many had heard of deep state before this last election cycle? Most people had not. What is the deep state? The deep state is that permanent state, that permanent government, which is operating behind the scenes and has been for a couple of generations now, and that is why we could have all the intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, all of them, as well as the DOJ and the State Department, all of them working to undermine the president while he is trying to serve the American people. They have actually, for the last year, engineered an attempted coup of the President of the United States. That is treason. That is treason. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a war. It is a big war. It is not just a political war. This is total war. And as Andrew Breitbart used to say, we're not just in a political fight. Politics is downstream from culture. Well, beyond that, the corollary to that is that the culture is downstream from religion. And as long as we allow the deep state, the big media, big tech and whatnot to wage war ceaselessly on our religion, on our faith, and specifically I mean the Christian religion, which has been under attack, then we are not going to see much hope of ever extricating ourselves from this or reversing the course. So it is our faith which is really at the core of what is going to lead us and protect us in the days ahead. And so I was very glad that, as we heard earlier, President Trump has called for a day of prayer for the coronavirus, and I think we need it even more for the TDS virus, which is just indicative of all of the subversive and perverse activities and tendencies which are undermining this country. And so I'd like to end by on that note by reading from Alfred Lord Tennyson on the passing of Arthur, King Arthur, Ideals of the King. Now, many Modern historians will tell you, oh, King Arthur didn't even exist, that's just all myth. It's not true. The historians have now established very well that indeed he was. He was a Christian king. He fought and redeemed England from the pagans that were running the country there. And he says in his, as he's dying, more things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of. So he's saying this to Sir Bedivere as he's dying. He's just been in this huge battle. He got cleft through the helm. And he says, I have lived my life in that which I have done. May he within himself make pure. But thou, if thou shouldst never see my face again, pray for my soul. More things are wrought by prayer than this world dreams of. Wherefore let thy voice rise like a fountain before me night and day. For what are men better than sheep or goats that nourish a blind life within the brain, if knowing God they lift not hands of prayer, both for themselves and those who call them friend? For so the whole round earth is every way bound by gold chains about the feet of God. So we had a plague in this country back in the 19th century when President Zachary Taylor was president. And he called, and it was devastating the whole country, he called on the people of the United States. He declared a day of prayer, fasting, and humiliation. And as the Bible commands, he called on the people to pray and to fast, and they did. It was universally accepted and done, and the American people were saved from the plague. It does work. It does happen. But God expects us to do our part. So we're going to call on God. We're going to pray. I believe in fasting. I come from the Catholic tradition. This is Lent, and so we fast and abstain quite a bit during Lent. But we're calling on God to forgive this country, to help this country, to bless this country, so that we can truly honor him. And we're going to do our parts. We're going to get out there every day and fight and help convince our fellow citizens what is the proper course that God wants us to take to restore this great republic. Thank you, and let's make America great again.
Bill's not just a talker, he's a doer. A few years ago in the form of a Unified Land Use Act. And it was seeking to completely remodel the whole county. And Bill took his time and helped educate and help fight. And it was a long battle, but at the end of it, we prevailed. And with thanks to Bill Jasper. So Bill, thank you.